Well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to The Collision. Daniel here. And 37 years after the original cult classic Ghostbusters hit theaters, Hollywood's back once again to ask us who you're going to call. Ghostbusters Afterlife just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So before I get into the review of this is my copy of the original Ghostbusters movie, and I got this thing in Canada, so it has the French, which if you can see, it says SOS Phantoms, and for some reason I just get a kick out of that. Apparently that's the French way to say Ghostbusters, but the original Ghostbusters has sort of become this cult classic kind of franchise. There's been shows and sequels, and probably the less we remember about the 2016 kind of all-female reboot, the better we can kind of leave that trapped away in a ghost trap. But it's kind of surprising actually that for a franchise like an IP that is as widespread as the Ghostbusters is, that there hasn't really been a whole lot of movies. This is Ghostbusters Afterlife. It's kind of the next kind of true continuation after Ghostbusters 2. So in 37 years, it's sort of like the third kind of true Ghostbusters movie. And this movie is very much a sequel, is very much playing off of kind of the original two Ghostbusters movies, and kind of leaning in hard to that sweet nostalgia, which we'll get into kind of for better or worse. We'll get into that. So I came into this movie. I didn't grow up as a huge Ghostbusters person, but I just sort of intrigued to see what they would do with it, and kind of left the theaters feeling like this is just sort of a mixed bag take. This is not the 2016 kind of ill-advised disaster that reboot was, but this is definitely nowhere kind of near the heights of the original one. It's a very different Ghostbusters movie than the films that it was kind of following after, which makes it kind of this odd juxtaposition with the fact that it's leaning so much into the nostalgia. But there is some good in this movie overall. I think the kind of without question the star of the film is nostalgia. This film leans hard into the old kind of the feels that we get seeing the old Ghostbusters, the car and the proton pack, and really kind of the big change for this movie is that it switched to kind of focus on a younger new cast. You have like the Stranger Things kid playing basically the same kid just in a different show, and the kids are all fine in this. The girl character, the young girl character is funny. All the characters are good, and kind of by shifting the focus to the younger characters, it lets audiences kind of rediscover the Ghostbusters through the eyes of these characters as they kind of see, find all the old props and stuff that the Ghostbusters had, and kind of the legacy. And in some ways, the film treats kind of the property, the legacy, almost with like an absurd amount of reverence. Every time that the car is revealed, it's always dramatic and very much paying kind of ode to the original, and even the way that they incorporate the original, like they make kind of scenes from the movie like canon in world with like YouTube clips and stuff as the characters are like watching the original Ghostbusters movie on their laptops. And so the way that they incorporate kind of the old stuff is really well done. You can't help but think they probably took some notes from maybe some of the backlash that like the Star Wars Force Awakens had. Like they treat the heroes very much with reverence, and these are the heroes, and the way that they kind of unpack that is very well done. Kind of the main problem with the film, at least to me, is that when you strip away that nostalgia, or if maybe you're just not like a huge Ghostbusters person, so seeing the ghost car doesn't necessarily get you all emotional, there's really just not a whole lot left in the film. Nothing kind of beyond the nostalgia. None of the characters are fine. Paul Rudd, the recently dubbed sexiest man alive 2021, he's in it. He's funny. He's amusing. The character there is some humor, but just none of the storylines really go anywhere. The characters, the kid characters, because it switched to kind of a younger audience, it really results in kind of a drastically different tone. The original one was definitely a comedy, but it had some spooks and some scares, and real kind of a dry sense of humor, maybe a bit more adult. Where this Ghostbusters Afterlife feels a lot more like something you would find that popped up on Disney Plus, a week before Halloween, and kind of a family-friendly ghost story. and it just sort of ends up in this odd kind of tension between it's trying to really much to appeal to these older kind of middle-aged people that grew up with the original and the nostalgia, but it's doing so in a very kind of kiddie, sanitized, not scary, dealing with more kind of young, 14, 12 and 14-year-old issues rather than kind of the adult characters. And so I don't know. Maybe it sort of is appealing to multiple different people, but it kind of feels like in trying to appeal to everyone, it just sort of ends up not really appealing to anyone. I don't know if the older people will appreciate the younger tone, or if the younger kids are going to care about all this heavy nostalgia. So the tone is definitely off. And again, it's not a scary movie by any means. There's really maybe one kind of scare or jump scare that kind of got me in the theaters. But other than that, the whole thing just feels very blah. It just sort of feels like that it's just sort of, it exists just to sort of pay over and kind of revisit some of the older stuff that people love, but it doesn't really have a whole lot story-wise or narrative-wise to offer on its own to justify kind of continuing on with this new legacy. As far as this content on the surface, there's I caught maybe 3 or 4 kind of minor profanities. I didn't catch like an F-bomb or anything, so not a whole lot of, and maybe a couple kind of crude references or innuendos, but definitely not heavy in the profanity. Sexuality, again, not super. There's no nudity. There's a moment where a young female character is changing, and you don't really see anything, and she sort of makes a comment, that it's no big deal that the boy sees her, but doesn't show anything on screen. And then there's a moment similar to that where the characters are kind of mocking teen virginity and how it's sort of a silly thing. So there's some of that kind of stuff that kind of makes light, I guess, of some of the sexual stuff. But as far as like seeing skin on screen, there's nothing to really be concerned with that. And then violence too. There's no real violence other than a really bizarre, crazy violent scene that happens. And again, you probably need to see the movie. It happens quite quick, where a character is literally kind of ripped in half. You don't really see, there's no blood, you don't see anything, but just the suggestion of it is quite horrific. And the character is like a ghost or a corpse or something. So it's not just like some normal human just getting torn to shreds or anything. But it just seemed jarring because the movie is so kind of clean in that sense and kind of more kid friendly that's just sort of the one moment that stood out. As far as the sort of things going on, maybe beneath the surface of this film. Again, this is a Ghostbusters movie, so this is not a film that you go that's going to be like probing into the deep, existential questions of humanity or spiritual truths. This is it's a ghost story, so it's not dealing with any too weighty kind of themes. But I did think there was kind of some interesting stuff. I can come at this film as a Christian. There is some interesting stuff as far as this sort of kind of believing in the unknown, believing in the supernatural. There's a moment where kind of a funny child character is talking to another one. This character has his own he calls himself Podcast, and he's all into conspiracy theories, and he just sort of believes anything, and he's this kind of way out there, kind of Fox Mulder like believe in anything. He's talking to this other girl and kind of says, you don't believe in ghosts even with all the evidence. And it kind of becomes a through line of this film that there is so much evidence for the ghosts and the supernatural stuff happening around this community, but so many of the characters sort of choose to ignore it or not investigate in it. There's the village that this film takes place in. There's like these sort of earthquakes that happen kind of on the clock, and there's really no explanation for why they happen. It's not around anywhere where there should be earthquakes, and you sort of see kind of almost becomes like a running gag that all the people in the town just sort of, they're so used to these earthquakes that they're just continue on with their life without slowing as everything around them's kind of shaking. And only kind of the one Paul Rudd's character is kind of the only person in the town that seems to want to investigate and what is the explanation for this phenomenon that everyone just sort of takes for granted. And I think kind of if you approach it from that sense, there is some interesting kind of themes going on to kind of grapple with as this sort of a Christian. That I think films like Ghostbusters, sort of these supernatural stories, obviously the ghosts and stuff that it's showing are not like what you would find biblical teaching, kind of biblical spiritual warfare or anything like that. But it is sort of almost like a parable of just being kind of complacent and just sort of living your life and kind of being so focused on the moment that you just sort of miss all this crazy stuff that's happening all around you. So in that sense, I thought I thought there was some kind of interesting stuff as a Christian kind of to work through. So in the end, this film was fine. It wasn't a film that I found like super off-putting, or I just like hated it, or like I was mad at after the theater. It was, I enjoyed it enough while I was watching it. I was somewhat engaged to it, even if I didn't find a whole lot of just kind of in the story to all that gripping. But it's just sort of a movie that I was like, hey, that was good. And then I get in the car and drive home, and my wife asked me how the movie was, and like I have to stop and think and trying to remember what happened. It's just a very forgettable movie. And I think I'm assuming, because it's Hollywood, that the intention is that they're going to use this to launch the new legacy, the new franchise. And there's just nothing really in this film that kind of warrants kind of going further. Like, I'm not interested to see where these characters, these young kids, what they do with the Ghostbusters property. It's kind of, even the title, Afterlife, seems to kind of allude to. I think it's just, this film exists more to just sort of look back and kind of honor the life of the Ghostbusters. And that's probably just a good place to stop. But hey, it's Hollywood, so we'll probably be getting Ghostbusters Afterlife 2. I don't know, but I would say too that this film, there's really not a whole lot of ghosts. There's not a whole lot of appearances. This is not a CGI fest where it's this crazy colorful ghosts everywhere. And I was kind of surprised that there wasn't more ghosts. You go through most of the film just with these somewhat dull human characters, and you don't get kind of the real interesting ghosts. But I did appreciate that it kind of honored the original a bit, where it's not just over the top special effects. They just sort of use those kind of a little more tastefully, I guess. So as you can tell, I wasn't crazy about this film, but again, I wasn't a huge Ghostbuster guy to begin with. So maybe you guys, if you grew up with the Ghostbusters, will find more to enjoy. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. Did you enjoy the film? Did you get emotional when you kind of saw all the old school Ghostbusters stuff show up, and some of the characters from the original show up? Was that a big? I know in the theater people were cheering. Kind of the older crowd was all excited to see those guys back. So let me know what you guys thought about it. I'd love to have a conversation about it. And if you're approaching this film as a Christian, I'd love to hear what you guys, kind of how you navigate the sort of films that deal with supernatural and ghosts, and whether that's concerning to you, or whether you find those valuable to kind of remind us of the spiritual reality that we live in, which is more where I fall on that spectrum. But I'd love to have that conversation regardless of what you think. But most of all, thanks guys for checking out this video. I encourage you, like the channel, or like the video, subscribe to the channel, do all those things, kind of join with what we're doing here at The Collision. But stay safe, guys, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.